is just a huge honor for me today to be podcast interviewing Dr. Grant Selig, DDS, practices the surgical placement of dental implants in New York, Massachusetts, and Nevada, and is the president of the private implantlessons.com. With 32 years and over 30,000 implants performed from in-office to hospital-based environments, Dr. Selig travels all over the U.S. to train and mentor practice teams in implant case planning and placement. An accomplished national and international lecturer in his spare time, Dr. Selig is an avid golfer, an experienced race car driver, and a licensed pilot. I swear to God, he wants to die somewhat. He must be married or something. Dedicated to the hands-on training of implant procedures for beginners to advanced clinicians, Dr. Selig has recently teamed up with Cortex Dental Implants to offer exclusive one-on-one in-office training anywhere in the U.S. Canada. Using Cortex world-renowned implant platforms including Magix, which is the only drillless dental implant on the market. He has, my gosh, that enough is an entire podcast, how you do a drillless implant. I could really go on for 40 days and 40 nights about his resume. I mean, it's just, it's forever. He was the first to pioneer the surgical technique of determining single-stage versus two-stage procedure by the implementation of a torque device. This modality is currently advocated in the surgical protocols of various implant companies and is used by clinicians worldwide every day. Board-certified American Board of Oral Implantology in '98, diplomat in the ICOI in '94, one of the 10 multi-center Noble Biocare-sponsored facilities in North America, '97 and 2001. He's got a Bachelor of Arts in Chemistry, Indiana University. I mean, it just goes on forever and ever and ever. I think you need to go back to college, get a few more degrees, a few more initials behind your name. And then up there to the right, the only man of the show with hair, David Howlett, Vice President of Sales and Marketing at Cortex Dental Implants Industry, is a B2B sales, distribution, and digital marketing strategist who has worked with some of the biggest consumer, clinical, and lifestyle brands in the world. David has spent the past decade in high-impact executive roles in dental distribution, directing sales, marketing, and business development efforts for national dental suppliers, equipment manufacturers, and practice service providers. David joined Cortex Dental Implants last year, a global leader in dental implant innovations and digital solutions, where he currently serves as country manager and vice president of sales and marketing for their new U.S.-based operation headquartered in New York and New Jersey. So it sounds like both of you hate Canada. Is that just
I'll go to Toronto anytime as long as it's not winter.
Okay. So we got one of the two that will recognize Canada. What about you, Dave?
I have no problem with Canada. I actually have a love for it, but it's a little too cold this time of year.
Oh, my God. Canada is so interesting because Vancouver, British Columbia, Toronto, and Montreal are just, I mean, that's like London, Paris, and Tokyo. I mean, it's just three different world-class experiences in one country. You're like, what does this have to do with Canada? I mean, it's so distinctly, I love it. But hey, David, I'm going to start with you just because I'll forget it first of all. But you're talking about how you're a huge B2B distribution, digital marketing strategist, everything. The $1 million question on Dental Town is, when are all these companies going to sell just like on Amazon.com and forget the existing dental supply chain, Shine, Burkhart, Benco, Patterson? I remember when I went to the New York dental meeting, which is always the best time to go to New York. It's right after Thanksgiving. The weather's perfect. But for 4 years, you had these men in black suits from the Amazon table, and it was like nobody was talking to them, or they were whispering, and everybody's like, see those two men over there? I mean, it's caused this massive buzz. But for 4 years, they were always there. All the dentists always ask about it. What is the future of Amazon and dental supply distribution in the next 5 years?
Yeah, that's a great question. And if I knew the specific answer, I'd be rich already, Howard. But, I've seen that. I've also observed over the past few years, the Greater New York dental meeting has always been my home for the past 10 years or so, and we've run into each other there. As Amazon had over the past couple of years definitely been increasing their visual presence at the show and their sponsorships, and we were all kind of wondering what was happening, swirling around. There were rumors swirling around that they may team up with an existing distribution company at some point. What I've seen, Howard, on the distribution side, and this really was pressing for us a couple of years ago, we really dug into formulating strategies on the distribution side to offset what we knew was coming. And that is some of the bigger manufacturers will be and have been exploring new ways to distribute their products outside of those traditional authorized dealer relationships. And I see that that dealer relationship eroding in some respect. It's dominated by a few key players, but there's a huge middle market that's going to have a major problem this year in redefining their value to the customer and identifying their own unique service or value in the marketplace. So yeah, I think Amazon is just one factor. I think this year and the changes and the struggles that we've all had to react to from as a result of COVID have also highlighted and exacerbated some of the problems bubbling under within traditional dental distribution as well as on the private practice level. So yeah, I think a lot of distribution companies are going to have a moment this year where they're going to have to determine what their identity is and what their meaning to the marketplace is, other than I'm a little bit cheaper than the next guy.
Well, keep going. Now I want to go pop some popcorn and pop a beer. And I mean, what is this middle market disturbance coming out? Because there's a couple of issues at hand that Japan is one of the more isolated countries. When Genghis Khan rolled through Mongolia all the way through Persia and on, Japan just basically was in touch for 9,000 years. And a lot of those Japanese companies, they name something different. The same product has 10 different names around the world. And for 20 years, I've been telling them that on Dental Town that people get really confused and they say, and then they slowly find out, oh, that's the exact same product. They just name it one thing in Australia and one thing in the United States and around the world. But the more important thing is price discrimination. If I charged you $1 for a Coke and I charged Bill Gates $1,000 for a Coke, that is against the law and illegal. So that's price discrimination, number one. Number two is volume discounts, which is legal. If you buy one and Walmart buys 1,000, they can get a better deal, but you just have to show your math that it justifies the volume discount and it's legal. But number three is huge. It's geographic price discrimination, where they will sell a bonding agent kit for $500 in the United States and for about 20 countries. And then the other 200 countries are paying $50 in Brazil and India and Vietnam, and so you got this internet. So I've always wondered how an Amazon play would work, because how could you log on to Amazon and see that it's $50 if you live in India, $50 if you live in Rio, but $500 if you live in Miami? But what is this middle market disruption coming this year that you are talking about?
Yeah, I agree with you, Howard. That's a huge problem when it comes to online retailers, particularly from a global perspective. And I don't think Amazon's there yet, or our business is there yet to support that type of full scope relationship with Amazon. My suspicion, and I don't have a crystal ball, is that as they increase their interest in becoming more of a legitimate dental supplier, they will probably augment their services with traditional companies that can provide that deeper consult that's required. That you can ordering gloves or masks or paper products on Amazon, that's really easy. I don't need any help with that. But I'm certainly not going to be purchasing capital equipment or shared services or IT support or something like that. So I think there's going to be a blend of where Amazon will co-op one or more partners in the space to fill in the gaps on their assortment.
And I thought that might be actually Patterson, because usually suppliers, they always get the most successful district manager of a big place like California, Ohio, or something to go to the top, and then they got a guy out of nowhere. And I was looking at his background. I thought, oh, this is about the internet, or this is about something, a totally different business model. My instincts warm, hot?
Yes, I can assure you that some of the larger dental manufacturers are specifically recruiting in tech and IT to reevaluate their platforms and make sure that their business works efficiently digitally, because brick and mortar has changed significantly over the past few years, and we don't even know what's going to happen over the next couple of years. We can guess. But everyone's hedging their bet in that way. And so I see some of the larger manufacturers rather, that had typically relied on those traditional distribution relationships, now entertaining other types of conversations. By the way, that was very out in the open last time I visited Greater New York. A couple of manufacturers I met with surprised me with their candor in exploring ways to offset some of the declines they've had in the traditional channel model.
Yeah, they're always candid with me off the record. Because
Yeah.
I've been a journalist since I've owned my own magazine since 1994, and the really smart people, they're like, okay, are we on the record or are we off the record? And especially when you deal with dental insurance companies, they're just always off the record, and then the conversation starts. But and a shout out to Daniel Sullivan with Warren Oral Surgery and Dental Implant City in New Jersey. I think that's where we met. Isn't that where we met?
Last time we met, that's where it was. Yep. Yeah. You gave a very dynamic lecture to the group. And I love listening to you, Howard. You have so many great insights in terms of private practice business management. And that's another area that this year in particular is going to shine a big spotlight on. So distribution companies, middle market, as I've mentioned, are going to have an identity crisis, right? Unless you're delivering a significant and unique value to practices, you're not giving them any reason to be loyal to you, if there is such a thing. And it's really goes back to a comment that you had made in one of your previous podcasts, and where dentistry typically was all about me. Now more than ever, not just dentists, but businesses in general need to really start taking cues from their customers, in this case, patients, and readjust their lens so that is completely patient-centric. And it starts with that type of level of service that in dentistry we've come accustomed to, but in no other aspect of our lives do we accept a certain level of service that doesn't meet a particular, quote, brand quality, so to speak.
And now to the man of the hour, the Dr. Grant Selig. My gosh, what is it about Ohio State? First, it was Jack Hahn, and now it's...
Jack and I are very good friends. He's the reason why I actually went to dental school.
Are you serious?
I know Jack for 30 some odd years. Yep.
Oh my gosh. You guys are both legends. What is it? Well,
He's
first,
the legend. We have a kind of a thing. It's the three Jacks. There's Jack Hahn, Big Jack. Baby Jack is Jack Krauser. And I'm Infant Jack, but I don't have a Jack first name.
Oh, Jack Krauser, and he's down in Florida right now, right?
He's in Florida.
Oh my God, love that guy. Just love Jack to death. He is such an interesting guy. He was on the show 1101, so he beat you by 400 episodes. So so I guess we're going into reverse order here. But I wanted to get you on the show. I asked you to come on the show. You didn't ask me. I think
Thank you. I appreciate that a lot.
Oh, well, I appreciate what you're doing for dentistry. And I tell these kids when they get out of school that, in 1900, there were no specialties, and there were 8 when I got out of school. And now 32 years later, there's 12. And it's all specializing. And I tell when kids ask me, should I specialize? I always say, well, what you really need to do in a competitive market is just find one thing that you get really, really good at.
100% agreement.
But I wanted to ask you, one thing I was a little surprised about is, there were 8 specialties when you and I got out of school. Now there's 12. Were you surprised that implantology wasn't a specialty, and yet they got oral facial pain, oral med, oral path, oral radiology? Oral surgery is the most demanded specialty, then endo, then perio, then pediatric dentistry. Is implantology ever going to be a specialty, or the fact that the oral surgeons and periodontists split up the placements, is that where the problem lies?
I haven't paid a lot of attention to politics in the last few years. The AAID and individuals like Frank Recker, you may know, the attorney, was trying to get some things accomplished for that group. I don't really know if that's going to happen or not. Interestingly enough, a lot of the specialties that you and I are familiar with didn't really do any training until the mid to late 90s on implant procedures. So most of us wound up doing some form of a mentorship over a period of time. And that's why I have the capability of helping some of these younger dentists out to increase their menu of items, especially in some economic times. So yeah, I'm really kind of up in the air as to whether I think that will happen during our lifetime. I just think it's kind of amazing that the technology's gone from these things don't work, and the people that do them, who knows what's going on, to being a valid modality within a reasonably short period of time.
Wow. Well, if you didn't really get into watch much politics last year, that was a damn good year to stay out of politics.
I was actually at the AID meeting here, and everybody was kind of like, just stay away unless you want to get aggravated.
So what I think that you've done so amazing is, you got to get good at something. Just find one damn thing to get good at something. Most of the research shows that it's going to take you about 10,000 hours or 10 years to really get good at one thing. But I really like the place that you're doing is personal mentorship, where you will go there and mentor one surgeon in an office. Where did that idea come from, and how is it going?
I wouldn't have done any implants if I didn't spend time with some of these individuals like Jack Hahn, because back in '87 when I graduated, there weren't any really structured courses that you could take except for maybe Loma Linda and maybe a couple other around the country. So I learned the value of that. There's more and more individuals coming out of school. They'd like to learn some of these procedures. And what I found is looking at slides that are given and some of these different lectures with foam models and pig jaws, or may help some folks, but generally don't do well for me. I need a kind of a hands-on experience. So that's what I've been doing over the last 3 years, beta testing. It's been very successful. Those that decide to continue with their studies sometimes are 5, 6, 7, 8 visits. It's a home court advantage. So that way you have your staff, your own instrumentation. Many vendors are kind enough to allow some supplies for me to bring in, so it reduces some of their costs for these. And then you have someone that can either coach you or actually be involved depending upon when licensure takes place. So it's been very successful. I really love it. So go ahead.
Dentistry is what became a specialty of medicine with Pierre Fauchard 200 years ago. So these 12 specialties that we're talking about are really subspecialties of dentistry, and dentistry is a specialty of medicine. But a 200-year-old profession, dentistry in economics, it just grows maybe 1.5%, 2% greater than the rate of inflation, except for two areas, and that's clear aligners and implants.
Right.
And to me, those are the only double-digit growth areas I see in dentistry, as opposed to the cleaning exams and x-rays and crowns and all that kind of stuff. Do you agree with that or disagree?
I would totally agree with you. I would totally agree with you.
So a young kid, I think the herd divides them after I look at their first root canal. I mean, if they stay, a 0.5 millimeter from the terminal apex of the root, and they're a pulp lover, they probably will go into bleaching, bonding, and veneers and cosmetics and clear aligners. But man, if they're like me and they're an apical barbarian and they get a puff of sealer out the apex, they love it. They like blood and guts. They're going to do root canals, implants, surgeries, wisdom teeth. Is that kind of the way you see it?
I do, actually, because I do help some specialists around the country that have taken some lessons. But the predominance are GPs, mostly within graduating maybe 5 years. Some of that does change. But it seems as though the individuals I've been involved with, they break off into two directions. They're either true hardcore restorative dentists and don't really like blood, and then you have surgical individuals. So it's kind of funny you mentioned that. To discern between that, when I teach a group of people or one individual, almost like a golf lesson, I provide them a surgical cap. I actually had a in-hospital-based practice for about 23 years, so I'm used to being in an OR. So what I do is I provide them a surgical cap and say, when you put this on, put your restorative thoughts except for placement away, and you need to do surgery. And I find that some individuals do very, very well with that. And then occasionally some are not really meant for that. So.
Yeah, it's hard to take you serious because I feel like I'm talking to George on Seinfeld.
Yes,
and,
yeah, George Costanza.
Oh my gosh, two very handsome men. That is one hilarious, fancy, funny guy. I know that you're with a company, and that's fine. I mean, I love all that. I used to put a company on the cover every month of Dental Town because I still believe that if you took away about 500 dental companies, we're sitting out on a rug with a bunch of tools from Home Depot. And the
Correct.
only reason we look so hot is because there's companies like Cortex that are doing this. And by the way, this is not a commercial. Nobody pays to come on the show, anything like that. But when I was little, my dad, every vacation, we did two things. We were in Wichita, Kansas, and he'd want to go to a big amusement park. And then he called the big manufacturers along the way to see if they did tours. So
Sure.
me and my 5 sisters, we saw the tours of Coors Beer, where I learned that Adolf made his own bottles, and he made the first dental porcelain back in the day.
Didn't know that.
We were going to buy a family station wagon, but it was only under the condition that we could drive to Detroit, and they pulled us in a golf cart, and we got to watch our green station wagon go all the way down the assembly line. So cool. And I still do this to this day. When I went on vacation, my boys, I remember when we were at, my gosh, up there in Oregon, ADEC chairs, and the founder who passed away, him and his wife last year, you know, at one end you see pallets of leather and metal beads and all this stuff dropped off, and at the other end of the football field long line is ADEC chairs rolling off.
Right.
And they've seen it all, and it made a big impact. And I went to Israel for a week before the pandemic, and just seeing these implant companies. I mean, you know, what was Confucius said that to see, to touch, to feel. I mean, to learn, you got to be hands-on and see this. And I think you going into the office where you can see, touch, feel, see exactly what's going on with this implant surgeon. I mean, that has to be just a phenomenal way to transfer knowledge. But in saying all that, is the question on the minds of the dentists listening to you is take Danaher spun off their dental division. It's called Invista, and they got a high end. They own a high end Noble Biocare for $500, and they got a low end from Neodent from Brazil. And a lot of dentists are wondering, you know, if I fly Value Line, Southwest Airlines, and Deluxe, you know, United or American Airlines, whatever, I still get there. Are you agnostic towards these implants, or do you really think Cortex has something different?
Well, I have to be honest. David reached out to me and showed me some of their items, and the Magix implant, which is kind of interesting because I look for something that may be different in different applications. I am not a one implant person. I was involved with Noble Biocare for over 20 years. I've placed a good percentage of the implants that are on the market. So what I generally tell the individuals I train, you need to have at least 2 implants in your armamentarium because applications of different patients may require different things. So along those lines, David reached out to me. We had some very nice discussions. They're very much into continuing education and growing their sphere of opportunities here in the United States. I've done that before with a couple other companies who didn't have the same zeal. So this is an opportunity where the individuals that I train or I lecture will have an opportunity to see a different kind of implant that has some specific interest to me. So like an example, that's more or less defined as a drillless implant. Many times, depending upon the case, whether it's an extraction or a already healed edentulous area, usually may require just a pilot drill. One of the things that's nice about that is you have control as to the placement of the implant because you physically thread the implant past and expanded beyond that initial pilot drill. So if you have a patient that's anatomy, inferior alveolar canal, sinus, et cetera, from a cone beam shows you that it's going to be kind of close, why have rotary instruments that go all the way to place when you can kind of custom design its final placement? Also, because of having a hospital experience for, you know, most of my career, I treated a lot of medically compromised patients. I have found these surgeries are very much less traumatic. And these implants, especially if somebody's on some of these anticoagulant drugs, antiplatelets, et cetera, you have less bleeding, less traumatic, and the implant is actually very, very interesting. So I do have a whole host of other implants. If a particular individual wants to hire me to come to their office, I usually suggest what implant they may decide to choose. But if they have their own, I go along with whatever they have because most likely I've gone ahead and placed it already.
And how much does something like that cost? I mean, price matters.
Well, that's a good question. I thought about this a lot, and the economy has been up, down, left, and right. So what I don't want to have happen is, oh my God, Dr. Selig's going to be here in 2 weeks. We got to get people on the schedule so I can pay his X amount, like per day. So what I've gone ahead and have done has been very successful is I get a percentage of what cases are there. So that way you're never out of pocket and you're actually making some profit yourself by having your patient there. You don't have to travel. I'm there for you. And most of the patients I've been involved with are very, very happy that the doctor that they're associated with has brought me in more or less as a coach. So financially, they're always making money. It's a home court advantage. And at the same time, they don't have to be worried about paying a specific fee.
Huh, that's very interesting business model. So just in case that flew over some head, about a quarter of our viewers are still stuck and stranded in dental kindergarten school, and
You
so
mean like I was for a period of time? Yeah, I understand.
so just in case they missed it, explain again why it's the only drillless self-tapping dental implant on the market, patent pending, FDA cleared.
The focus of this particular implant system, the magics of this group, is that you use a pilot drill. I usually suggest about half the length that you're going to go, or three quarters, avoiding any anatomical structures. And then the implant actually self threads with a ratchet wrench or a torque wrench, and you decide where its final placement is. It's very aggressive and has initial high torque load.
Huh, that's very interesting. And when what do you they come out of school $400,000 in debt. There's
It's
a
unbelievable, Howard, isn't it? It's
yeah.
incredible.
What is that, Professor Scott Galloway? Scott Galloway has a chart showing inflation versus education inflation. Let me see if I can pull that up. Um, yeah, I mean it's just crazy. U.S. education prices versus inflation. Inflation in the United States from 98 to 2018 was 54% from 98 to 2018. And for education, it was 150%. How did education rise 100% higher in cost? But I mean, when it's that high, these kids, I feel guilty because when you and I came out of school, it wasn't that bad, and now it is that bad, and so I think that they have to be more successful, and so why they have to pick implants or clear aligners or some. They got to have some angle because. Well, I want to start with this. Professor Scott Galloway, he's in NYU. I mean, I think he's as sharp as we get. But why do you think education cost rose 100% more than inflation with the United States? And do you think this will have a significant impact on the dental students?
You know, it's interesting because I do practice in New York with someone that you might know, and he's associated with NYU. And the tuition is just shocking to me. I mean, I think Ohio State the first year was 12 grand because you had to buy instruments, and after that is probably $8,500. These students come out either with their parents being able to be fortunate enough to pay a portion of or all of it, or they're taking just these incredible student loans. So when you get out, you have a debt that's what, $2,000-3,000 a month. They may have difficulty trying to get finance for a home because of their debt income ratios. Fees, I think, do need to go up to some degree, but then you have a ceiling as to what kind of patients you have that can afford these things. That's why, as you very correctly mentioned, and I appreciate that, not that it's a dollar incentive, because it isn't. You really have to love what you're doing and be good at it, is the fact that if you implement other things in your menu of items, such as maybe some of these airway management issues, aligners, like you said, and dental implants, whether you do the surgery or you do the prosthetics or both, is really a way to increase your margins in comparison to doing, formalized general dentistry. And I think a lot of these kids, that's really the choice they have to get into, unless it's a very established practice that does normally well, and you do well basically right off the bat.
So, it's just it's a burden I feel guilty about. Well, I want to ask this. Do you think when you and I got out of school, it was easier to set up your own shop, your own office, own the land and building, and live happily ever after than it is 30 years later today?
It's almost shocking. how much more difficult it is now.
Yeah, and that's why I'm trying to transfer as much knowledge as I can, because I feel like when we got out of school, you could have like I did demographics and found that Phoenix was growing at 2
Right.
or 3 times the rate of
Of
Wichita.
course.
But
One of my
if
best
I
friends
would have
at Ohio
stayed,
State moved to Phoenix. He's in Paradise Valley. Best decision he ever made in his life.
who's that?
Michael Steinberg.
Oh yeah. And my gosh, but if I would have stayed in Wichita, I would have done just fine. I had lots of friends that stayed there and did just fine. But I feel now that the one major thing with the kids is that they can't bumble out of school and make 3 out of 4 bad decisions and still be okay. Now they need to come out of school and they're still going to be fine, but they got to make some really good decisions.
Yes.
They got to make 4 or 5 really good macroeconomic decisions right out of the gate. And there's this other trend about DSOs. So I want to ask you the tough question where how does a young kid come out of school and say, well, you know what? I'm interested in implants and I want to be an implantologist, when they're competing against Aspen. Bob Fontana just bought Clear Choice. I mean, that's been
was
bought and sold.
actually in Syracuse training somebody at the hotel that was across the parking lot from Aspen when that took place. Yeah.
So if she looks at that macro and she says, well, how am I going to learn implants and compete with Bob Fontana that has 1,000 locations and just bought Clear Choice? And so she has fear. What would you say to her? Does she still got a shot?
Everybody has a shot. You and I both know that if you have the skill set and the personality, you will be successful, no matter where you are. However, it is a more scary environment than I believe it was when you and I first got out of dental school. But the population's increased in every state. Phoenix, Scottsdale is a much larger population than it was 20, 30, 35 years ago. So you would think those things would be parallel as far as their growth pattern. The most important thing, and this is not to tap my own shoulder or so on and so forth, training is very, very important. There's multiple places that students can go to get some basic, if not advanced information. What I usually find is some people will choose me at the very beginning or will choose me secondarily to go ahead and hone their skills after they've gone to a place like Implant Pathways with, Justin Moody and the AID Maxi courses and so on and so forth. And then I come to kind of hone their skills. But I think if you're committed to learning something, like for instance, one of the students that has been very, very successful with implants. He's basically looking for an associate now, only being in the game for about 2 years. He's like, basically, I paid a lot of money for dental school. As long as you don't rip me off and I learn something, I'm happy to pay the tuition. And I think when you have that kind of idea, basically everybody I've trained has gone to a position where they're much more successful, which is a nice thing. It makes me feel very happy. So there's always an opportunity. I think it's very important to be trained properly. What I don't like to see is someone who's taken a few weekend courses. They may not have had any live experiences. They put in an implant or 2 here or there. Then they do an edentulous lowercase. Then they do an edentulous uppercase. And then the next thing they're down the road of all on 4s and then show up at a zygo course. That's a mathematical issue that will create nothing but a serious problem.
I agree, and I remember Dave Howlett telling me that he wished he wouldn't have got his hair transplants from that guy who just did that weekend course.
I'm going to need them pretty soon. I know you're jealous, but I'm on my way. I'm heading your way.
Yeah, exactly. Preserve that which remains, right? The prosthodontic philosophy.
I have a couple of comments about that, Howard. You mentioned something about 5 years ago. I want to say that the bigger companies in the space, particularly in distribution, definitely leveraged that trend that you had just mentioned. Coming out of dental school, I'm $450,000 in debt. Do I really want to try to take on owning my own practice? By the way, I don't really know much about being a business person. I'm a dentist, right? So they naturally, I think, had a tendency to gravitate towards the DSO model because it's easy. I can go on salary. I can learn my craft. I can understand how the office works, and then maybe I'll branch out on my own. But one thing that I've also noticed over the past few years is that recent graduates have a very different mindset than 20 or 30 years ago. They're getting into dentistry to get out of dentistry, if that makes sense. So they're already talking 2-3 years out of school. They're already talking about their exit plan because they want to start flipping practices, right? They want to get into the group game. So both of these sort of speak to something that sort of shocked me at the end of last year, Howard. I read an article, and I want to give a hat tip to dental economics, I'm not sure, but it was a reflection of 2020 and how private practices have fared over the course of this year. And I was surprised to learn that 1/3 of private practices are not only not hitting their revenues, but significantly under revenue, to the point where they're going to have to make a decision over the next 12 months. Do I stay in business? The middle market DSO, naturally very consistent earnings year over year, even through the pandemic. And again, for a lot of the reasons you had mentioned, they're a little bit more prepared than many private practices to absorb some of the impact of what's going on around us. North of that number, private practices, 1/3 of them, very entrepreneurial and doing great. They've already adopted new technologies. They've already understood that they can't just drill and fill. They have to provide a unique level of service to their patient. And again, the third is, again, I go back to the expectation of the patient and the tolerance that they have for the quality of work that they expect. So I think you've got a similar dynamic with DSO, with the quote DSOs, or the burden of the cost of taking on a private practice. But 1/3 of those independent practices are thinking about their business a little bit differently. And that's sort of where we're cluing into the entrepreneurial aspect, where they're less reliant on vendors, they're less reliant on manufacturers to make decisions for them. And they're taking some of that ownership back.
Well, I want to ask you a Cortex question, but I have to ask another question first.
Yeah.
So when we started the dental town, we have 50 forums, we went to implants. The first thing we had to do is separate the herd between implants and mini implants, because anytime a person posts a mini implant case, it was always the same thing. We had the same problem with CAD CAM when you had the Serac crazies versus the E4D, and some guy would buy a $150,000 machine from E4D in Dallas, and every time he'd ask a question, he'd just get the same lectures from all the paid spokesmen for Serac about how he made the wrong. So we had to separate CAD CAM. So my first question is, I want to ask Grant. Grant, is there any salvation in a mini implant, or if you think about that, is it an impure thought?
I'll give you my own personal opinion. So that's my disclaimer. I get asked this question all the time. I've never placed a mini dental implant. I can only tell you the malpractice cases that have come across my desk to be an expert witness. Generally speaking, if you can put a mini implant in and you have the grafting skills, you should be able to put in a normal dental implant. The other thing is an example. There was a run of these for a while. I don't know what happened to them. Maybe the patients, who knows? I'd see 4 mini implants with the ball attachment, as you're aware of. The retention for their denture base would be minimal with 4 implants. I'd either remove the 4 or cut them off below the gun line. I'd put 2 normalized dental implants in, which I don't generally suggest. And the retention is like 50 minis. The crown and bridge I see over minis is something that is a litigious activity, in my opinion. So I'm an anti-mini person virtually completely. The ones that do seem to fare well are those that have a severely atrophied lower jaw, where the cortical plates are almost superimposed. So because of that, you do have an opportunity where I think those do a little better. The other comment I used to make years ago is, you have companies at the time like Noble Biocare, Steria, some of the others that have a plethora of revenue to go ahead and design the world's best, quote unquote, mini implant. And no manufacturer really went to that direction. We discussed this a long time ago with Steve Herson, the chief engineer for Nobel and Stereas, and there just doesn't seem to be a need for these. So that's my comment.
And the name of the company, Cortex, it's actually a medical term, the outer portion of an organ as distinguished from the inner or medullary portion. In fact, when you go to do a search on Dental Town, what's great about Dental Town, it's not like all social media, Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn, were just LIFO, last in, first out. Every one of the 6 million posts is indexed. So
Right.
if you do a search for Cortex, You find the Cortex, it's all mixed up with use of a medical term, which makes me wonder, where did the name Cortex Dental Implant Industries coming from? What was it about this outer portion that got you going? And then I want you to tell the kids about how the outer portion of an implant has been a very changing thing. Back in the day, they used to cover it with hydroxyapatite. So where does Cortex, what does Cortex mean to you? And what does the outer portion of this Cortex dental implant mean? And how have outer cortex surfaces changed over the years?
Good questions. The first one I'm going to have a hard time answering because I didn't name the company. So I'll check with ownership as to what their inspiration was, other than it sounds really great.
Sounds good.
I came to learn of Cortex as a distribution partner a couple of years ago. Cortex was established in 2008, based in Israel. So next time you're in Israel, we'll make sure that you're able to tour our world-class facility. We've got a 4,000 square foot facility that increased production, tripled production this year, just ahead of COVID. And we've got an absolute world-class team and training center where we've got people flying in from all around the world on a pretty consistent basis to get trained up on our fully digital workflow. So it's a very impressive campus that I'd love for you to visit at some point. Cortex was established by what I'll call a consortium of dentists and surgeons from around the world that wanted to deliver innovation on the product side. What I've seen, Howard, in implants is that over the years, most of the innovation, or at least the highlights of innovation, have taken place on the digital side. Of course, like many other companies, we've got a fully digital workflow as well. So the guided surgery systems, scanning technology, software, we've seen leaps and bounds over the past few years on that side of the category. But what hasn't changed over the past few years really are the product itself. Here in the United States, there are probably 6 or 7 household names that dominate the implant space. They're mostly direct companies. And there are about 120 or 100, maybe even north of 150 implant companies that are based outside of the US that are all fighting for a piece of this market. And all of them do so at various levels of success. Cortex is actually ranked globally anywhere between number 15 and number 20 on any given day. Very established business in regions like China and Colombia and Brazil and Middle East and UK and Israel, of course, is our backyard. The US has been a very tricky market for companies based in other countries. And to that end, Cortex made a commitment last year to reevaluate and reposition themselves for success here in the US. So I started working with them late last year to develop what I'll call our US-based sales operations. And one thing that really gives us an advantage over a lot of the clutter that private practices are dealing with are dozens of companies that they don't know who to contact. They don't know if they have customer service. They don't know they don't really have a lot of information on them. They don't really have a local ambassador to shepherd them through their needs. So Cortex already has recognized that we've got to separate ourselves from the rest of the pack here in the US by establishing ourselves domestically. So we are based in New Jersey. All of our inventory is housed there. We ship 1 to 2 days, same day of order. And we work very closely with our practices directly, more of on a consultative basis, to make sure that we start with training. Over the past 3 months, we've trained over 37 offices on Cortex systems. And the average post 90-day train is seeing anywhere between 30 to 40% left in their treatment acceptance for particularly full arch, but implant business in general. So, I want to go back to this notion of 1/3 of private practices really needed to make that decision that they probably should have made 2, 3, 4 years ago. And that is really invest in the future of my private business, because the confidence or the consistency of having that exit plan of, well, I'm just going to get bought out by a DSO. If the private practice hasn't done the work to be attractive enough to that group, the leverage is flowing in the opposite direction now. Private practice has to prove that they're worthy of being part of that group. So there are 4 or 5 reasons why private practices probably have avoided taking that leap, whether it be implants or technology or just advancing their profile as a private practice previously. And I think you nailed one of them. One starts with it's really expensive, right? The perception of what kind of investment I'm going to need to make to transform my private practice that I'm doing drill and fill into something special, something unique, and a destination for patients, right? Because there is a lot of competition out there. Number two, I think, and maybe even number one, is the fear. Okay, so I actually very good, close with a doctor who just sold his practice, has never placed an implant. He's learned about Magics and Cortex through me, and just recently said, if I knew this before I sold my practice, I probably would have tried to start placing implants. If I knew it was as easy as you're showing me it is, and affordable as it is, and it can transform my revenue goals, I really should have had this conversation 6 months ago before my wife convinced me to sell the practice. So what we're seeing is an opportunity here where, COVID's put a damper on all of our trade and exhibition opportunities to collaborate and to get together with practices in person, where we don't often do that one-on-one every day. So with the evaporation of that trade channel, it's been difficult to get back to a situation where you can get CE training, right? Lectures are coming back, but they're slow, they're socially distanced. So we've got a couple of doctors that are training within their facilities, but just think about the power or the value of having someone come into your office on your own time with your team, on live surgery cases in your office. We don't see any other companies in this space really offering this level of intimate relationship with their practices. So this is something that we're going to program out shortly with Dr. Selig. We're so excited to have someone of his level of expertise on the team, and acting as a clinical brand ambassador and guiding, not just once, not just for one lecture, but holding the hand of that private practice throughout their relationship with our company to ensure that they've always got instant support and clinical reference.
Well answered. So now I'm going to put Grant back on the spot. Are you ready, Grant? Are you ready?
I'm ready.
To be on the
Seatbelts
spot?
on.
All right. On Dental Town, a gentleman asked, Cortex, the name of the thread is Cortex Dental Implants. Hello all. I have a patient who had dental implants placed in South San Diego, aka Tijuana. The type of implants placed are called Cortex. They appear to be well integrated. I will be restoring them. Is it prosthetically compatible with any of the U.S. brands?
Yes. So we have 3 lines. Magics is our new line, and it's not compatible with anything. It's a very unique product. Our 2 other lines, Classics and Dynamics, available in hex and conical, are compatible with the product that your doctor's most likely using. So similar platforms, similar toolkits.
My gosh, very good. And then the next question I was going to ask is, you can have the greatest product in the world. You can, but it sits in your garage. But if you get it on the shelves of Walmart, you now have 4,000 locations, and it's flying out the door. So a lot of these kids, they build a great service. They learn how to place implants. How do you market it? How do you brand it? You work with a lot of studs, the 2 Jacks and Grant, the Ohio State University implant legends. How is this young kid, after he learns to place this, how does he build that brand?
Yeah, that's another great question. I know you spent a lot of time on practice marketing, Howard. I've seen you emphasize the need for social media marketing, website development and management, answering the phone, right, being available for all those missed calls. Well, this is sort of a different component in terms of treatment acceptance. I see a lot of private practices even outsourcing this function, right? So they're hiring consultants that are well versed in being able to convince a patient to accept a treatment. Well, I think particularly Magics ties into this question, Howard, in the sense that in other regions where we're more established, we actually have consumer-based television commercials and programming catering to patients. The notion that you don't have to avoid that scary dental work that you had been putting off because you're afraid of all of the drills and all the time and all of the healing and all the return visits and potential complications. When it comes to our system, we eliminate a lot of that up front. by making sure that, number one, Magix, by the way, I have an oversized version of it. We'll just show it to you here. Very interesting thread, unique thread here with our an aggressive cutting thread. SLA surface, we talked about surface treatments before. So this is sandblasted, acid etched, incredibly high level of osseointegration. And you can see the body, the apex is super sharp, right? So great for immediate load, great for all on four. But more importantly, this is a great story for patients, right? You're in and out in one day with a digital dentistry workflow that eliminates all of the sequence of drills that you're so scared of, where Dr. Selig mentioned, you're using your punch, your tissue punch, your flap, you're using your pilot drill, and you're eliminating the other 8 or 9 drills from our sequence, which means you've got a much higher level of, or much lower level of patient anxiety, time in the chair. You're saving about 50% of your time chair side, which is another cost savings, right? So if we can actually work through a practice's revenue goals, revamping just based on time management alone, saving half of the time chair side on your virtual workflow, and then the assurance that the patient isn't going to have the type of complications that they may experience with other products. Although I won't guarantee a zero fail rate, I haven't seen any returns, feedback, or information with regards to our implants failing or complications out of the realm. So it provides doctor with a very consistent, accurate system. The guided surgery system that we have is great. Our drills have color-coded stoppers, so there's no perforation unintentionally. Our guided surgery kit shows up in one box with everything you need for the surgery in sequence. And I don't want to say it makes things easy because I didn't go to school to place implants, but after one day of hands-on training, I felt really good about placing implants on a model. So I know that we've accelerated the comfort level of getting into the space. We've reduced the barrier of entry in terms of the perceived investment or cost. And not only are we going to train you and your team, but we don't just leave you after that. You have Dr. Selig available to you as your professional mentor ongoing. So you'll work with Dr. Selig day to day for your Cortex needs, and he'll work with you on case planning, on making sure you've got the right products for the case, et cetera. So that to me or to us rather, is a huge distinguishing factor in the way in which we choose to service our practices.
Okay, my when I got interested in dentistry, there was no computers, laptops, cell phones, anything like that. I either went to work with my father, who owned 9 Sonic drive-ins, the love of my life, and made
I didn't
hamburgers.
know that. That's fabulous.
Oh my God, that's where I learned all my business, because my 5 sisters weren't interested in it, and Dad would always have to go to these franchise meetings, and a lot of times we were in Wichita, we'd have to drive 6 hours down 35 to Dallas, and that's where I met Ray Kroc. I met Ray Kroc when I was 10 years old, sitting in the front row. In fact, can I give you my Ray Kroc impression?
Yes, please.
Ray was he was such a human, and he said, so the whole franchise thing took place after World War II. Eisenhower saw how fast the German Autobahns could take a manufactured tank or something and move it 1,000 miles. So he came back and he started this interstate system. And before the interstate, 90% of Americans were born, raised, lived, and died and never went 100 miles away from home. And then they built these interstates. And I remember, like our family, we got in the station wagon and drove to Disneyland and saw the ocean. And we played, me and my 5 sisters played Monopoly in the back the whole way there. There were no seatbelts. My mom and dad sat in the front. They had a case of Old Milwaukee in between them. They were just drinking the beers and throwing them out the windows, and just the best of life. And but when they got to the next city, they didn't know anything. And Ray saw this brand where when they get to the next city of unknowns, if they saw something familiar, they would go there, and that was the birth of the franchise. My dad got into Sonic, and Ray said, I'll never forget the only thing that I can remember him saying. He said, now, when they pull off that interstate, they're going to see a gas station. And he says, they're going to have to go to the bathroom. Now, see, Dad, he'll pee anywhere. He'll pee on his own truck. He'll pee on the tire of his own Ford. But Mama Bear, she's a squatter. And
Yep.
she's going to see that gas station. She's going to know that it's going to look like a camel just used it. Then she's going to go to the convenience store and they're going to lie through their teeth and say, we don't have a bathroom. So what do you have, a catheter? And he goes, but we're going to clean the woman's bathroom every hour on the hour. And that mama's going to know that that's going to be the cleanest bathroom on the corner. And as far as the men's room, shit, just clean it at the end of the day one time. They don't care where they pee. And that's my whole Ray Kroc deal. My gosh. And I got off on that big deal rant, and I was wondering where I was even.
That's okay. I used, Wendy's corporate headquarters are in Columbus, and you had Victoria's Secret. I was friendly with a lot of those different people. So these stories are just, they're hilarious. Absolutely.
And Wendy's, I never got to meet the founder of Wendy's, but I did think it was very neat that he was always in third place. It was always McDonald's #1, Burger King #2, Wendy's #3. And when the old man died, she had listened to everyone, and she didn't have a magic bullet. She didn't have a silver thing, but there was like 100 little things, like women would bite the lettuce, but it wasn't crisp, so it would pull, and then the mustard would go on her clothes. And she changed 100 little things, and Dave wasn't even dead for a year, and Wendy's finally passed Burger King and became #2. And the problem with Burger King is they did the Subway thing where they allowed multiple franchisees, so you could have like 9 or 10 locations, which means you're just in it for the money. Whereas McDonald's and now the best one is Chicken Place. What's the
Filet.
Chick-fil-A. Chick-fil-A will only give you one, and you have to be born in the city that you're there, and you have to be.
That stuff.
You have to be born in that city, married, and you got to have kids that go to school in that city, and you're only going to get one. And so that's why they do $3 million a year, off the charts. But my gosh, I started thinking about all that stuff, and
that's why there's always good room for a recent graduate.
But here's the deal. I would go to work with my father, and he'd make onion rings and French fries and hot dogs. And then I go to work with my neighbor, Kenny Anderson, who's still a practicing dentist 50 years later in Wichita, Kansas. And he took an x-ray of a tooth and he could see through the tooth. And it was the technology of the day. And then you get to go in the dark room with a really hot dental assistant and start dipping x-rays. And I always thought all the girls that work in dental assistants, they were like, at Sonics, they were all like teenagers and crazy, and half of them didn't show up for work. And then the dental office, these older, mature, amazing women. And so my young homies that are under 30 and on Instagram, as opposed to the old guys like me and you that are on Twitter, they are all about digital technology, and they're sitting here listening to all this and saying, are you going to show a virtual case planning? Do you have a is a CBCT, is that standard of care? And will that CBCT go into some virtual case planning software, and will it pull up the Cortex implants? Can I do all of this on my computer?
Yeah, it's all good questions. And yes, we use all open software, so it's all STL and CBCT and intraoral is how we do it. So you take a CBT scan, we layer that on top of the intraoral. We do virtual planning along with our digital team, close the file, produce the materials, and it's on the way. So to answer your question, yes.
And was that the longest question for the
but okay. In the rambling about Sonic, you kind of nailed it. Bringing it back to know thy customer, right? I mean, these little insights about how women go to the bathroom. I mean, just think about how those little things that cater to your patient or your customer all add up to your brand profile, right?
Yeah, you'll come into office and a patient will get an implant. They'll never know the brand of the implant, and they'll never know any of that. They're only gonna know how you made them feel. And if you walk in there and no one greets you and just hands you a chart, sign in like you're a cow, might as well just come around the corner and brand them Rocking Our Dental right on their butt. I mean, they're only gonna remember how they feel, and that's kind of a weird thing with humans, because I've been listening to people for coming up on 59 years this year, and my gosh, whenever they recommend a doctor, they'll say, well, I need to find a doctor for this, and they'll say, oh, well, you should go to Grant, and I'll say, well, is Grant a board certified doctor? Do you know what school he went to? Has he ever been sued? You don't know anything about this guy? Oh, he's so adorable. He's so sweet. He's so nice. I've never, half the MDs in America are board certified and the other half aren't. And I'm still waiting for one person to say, Well, is that guy board certified? You know, to be board certified, you got to be out of school 5 years, take a test, an oral exam. I think that's a league above. Your guy might not care, or he might be too young. I mean, it has nothing to do with anything. They only refer on personalities. And I had this problem when I set up my practice. I had an orthodontist that was perfect, but he was dry and he didn't connect with the patients. Then I had another guy, laid back, fun, just an all-American guy. His ortho was good. I mean, it was all good, and I'd say it was really good, but it wasn't like completely perfect like this stoic guy.
Yeah.
And the stoic guy just got eaten alive in a world. But I want to ask you, I want to go back to the CBCT, because when I look at Dental Town traffic, I mean, half the people just go there and read today's active topics, see what everybody's talking about. But whenever they got to spend a ton of change, like $150,000 on a CBCT or a CAD cam or a Lanap laser, which is the question after this one, they'll do a search and they'll stay on there for 3 hours reading
For sure.
what the hell's going on.
Absolutely.
And when you look at these three implant legends of Ohio State University School of Dentistry, Jack Hand, Jack Krauser, and you, the man, Grant Selig, I know for a fact Jack Hand placed his first 10,000 implants on a pano.
We all did. Did you have a
And
program, Howard?
I'm so old, I still think when people say CBCT was the greatest gift to dental oral radiology, they don't even know what they're talking about. The greatest gift to dental radiology was when they did that software upgrade where the pano printed out an R on one side
There
and
you
an
go.
L on the other, and you're like,
100%.
God dang, that is so
Made it
badass
really
cool.
easy, didn't it?
Oh
Yeah.
my God. So how could is the CBC standard of care when you and Jack place 10,000 implants with a 2-dimensional pano?
Okay, so here's the deal. It's not standard of care yet throughout the United States, but it's region to region. And my personal opinion is you're really in today's world where you do have your orthodontic referrals, you have your endodontic referrals if they're not in office. You can easily send a patient to get a cone beam there. And, you can work out some association. There may be people that you send patients to on a regular basis in order to get that technology done. I really believe that if you have any access at all, you really should have a cone beam before doing the surgery. There's really no reason against it, especially when you have that opportunity logistically where maybe you don't have to own one. Although all of my colleagues that have gone ahead and bought these, they seem to be revenue producing decisions. It's interesting as an aside, Howard. It was about 2 years ago, I gave a full house lecture in New York in Manhattan. Very astute doctors, mostly GPs, couple specialists. And I usually start off by saying, who has a cone beam? I usually start off by who does implants, but then who has a cone beam? And shockingly enough, if there were 100 people there, maybe 15 had cone beams. 2.5, well, I got to think about COVID. So it was about 2.5 years ago. I'll give a presentation like in Houston, and how many people have a cone beam? It's basically full house raised their hands. So, yes, it's an expensive consideration, more than probably some of our equipment. But I personally believe that that's a technology you have to use. It's funny you're talking about x-rays. I remember the days where it was so nice to do a pilot drill, take an x-ray and have it go through the machine. Was it the A2000 on endospeed? And I could chill out for a little bit. And then these digital x-rays came into place. That as soon as the x-ray is gone, I got to go look at the patient, decide, okay, do I have to adjust this or do I move forward? It was a huge change. That 2 minutes was huge.
Well, here's what you said that really rang home to me is that, I'll go to any dentist and that's thinking about buying a CBCT. And so I'll ask you too, I'll put you on the spot. How old is the smartphone that you're holding in your hand right now? How old is it?
I think it's an 8+, so it's what, 2-3 years old?
I just got a new one, so this is brand new. This is the 11.
Exactly.
If Apple was open here in town, I would have gotten a phone during the pandemic, but it was like pulling teeth. Let's put it that way.
So the bottom line is, I don't know what smartphone I'm on, but my first one was a Motorola flip phone, and then it was a Nokia, and then all the stuff like that. So I don't know why you're buying $100,000 CBCT, and then when it's paid off, like you're going to like it for 20, 30 years. Every doctor I go to, if they need an image, they send me to an imaging place. Like I live in Ahwatukee. It's been annexed by Phoenix. It's really Phoenix, but everybody that lives here says it's Ahwatukee. And there's this place that has all the imaging stuff. They have the MRIs, the CAT scans,
Very popular in Europe.
and they have the dental stuff too. But the thing about them is if you buy, like there's 168 hours in a week. So if you buy a CBCT, let's say you used it every hour for 32 hours. Well, that's not even 19% of the week. It's still not being used 81% of the time. And they, because of their volume, they're upgrading their MRIs and CAT scans and imaging equipment like you and I are upgrading our cell phones. So I don't know why. I don't see any reason why you would want to buy a technology and then keep it for 20 years because it's paid off for. I mean, and when you tell a human in America, okay, well, we're going to need to send you for an image, and like in Ahwatukee, it's just 2 miles down on Ray Road. You know where that big medical center is? Yeah, they have imaging there, and every patient says, oh, yeah, I went there to have my kidneys imaged. So I definitely don't think you need to buy one. And then number two, the oral surgeons and the implantologists and the periodontists and everything, they're sending you cookies. They're trying to get you to go to lunch. If you call them up and say, can I have an arrangement with a CBCT in your office? I haven't heard of anybody that said no. I mean, they're like, oh my God, you called me. Yeah, you called me.
There's still some time periods. So let's just say, as the devil's advocate, you have a patient comes in, number 4 is bothering the patient. You take a PA and you're like, might actually be an immediate placement. Instead of going ahead and having your own cone beam to see maybe there's a little bit more information on the topography of the sinus that maybe that tooth is near, or number 3, there's some time lag in order to get that done versus potentially having the patient have the cone beam done in your office and you decide it meets the criteria for the immediate placement and extraction. That does make a difference depending upon how your practice is. But I agree with you in a very large part that patients are used to going to those centers now. I would do that years ago, and in some instances still prefer that to be done. Some of their technologies are more expensive because they have the wherewithal to be able to afford those things, and patients are used to it now. There's also these mobile CAT scan units that go around the larger cities, especially in Manhattan. That's very popular. So I agree with you. There is some definitive diagnoses that can be made with a cone beam that are generally better than a PA, even with these high standard sensors now. So that's really a toss of the coin. I think it really depends upon your opportunity of usage. And then doing the numbers like you spend a lot of time with, which I think is a very important portion of the entire dental focus. You've been very, very helpful with a lot of these students and any one of us to be able to go ahead and try to figure out what actually makes business sense.
So I can't believe we went over an hour, but I still have one question left. So you got to stay for the overtime question, and that is this. My first foray into implantology was kind of embarrassing. I was out here in Arizona, and I found it demographics. They didn't have a dental school. They didn't have water fluoridation. The adjacent states where you're at, Nevada and Utah, didn't have a dental school. Right. And my gosh, it was. I found a zip code that was building 90 homes a month. I mean, I just looked at that compared to everything else I found in the United States, and I graduated May 11, went straight to Phoenix.
That's my birthday.
May 11?
Yeah.
And my gosh, and the rest was history. Now, but when I was trying to get my FAGD because I would go whenever I went to continuing education courses, I realized it was always the same 100 people, and they all were older people that had this FAGD after their name, and I realized it was a club of just people that were really into CE, and so I wanted to join that. Well, anyway. There was no dental school or anything like that, and had this big requirement for implants. And I called the guy and I said, look, I don't want to do implants and I don't want to do ortho. So can I just keep doing restorative classes and get out of that? And he said no. And I got really upset. I'm like, why? This is stupid. And he's like, Howard, look, you're young, I'm old, you got to cross train, and and even if you're not going to place implants or ortho, patient's going to ask you questions. So just shut up, and you're going to do this. And so I'm looking around in the mail. They didn't have internet back then. And I found this place. I could go to University of Pittsburgh with this guy. I don't know if you've ever heard of him or not, Carl Mish.
Yeah, of course.
And it was 7 3-day weekends, and I could knock out my requirements. So I thought, all right, this sucks. I'm going to, I wasn't a Steelers fan. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to do this anyway.
And it's cold there, depending upon when you went.
And I went there. I mean, it was just love at first sight. I fell completely in love with Carl Mish, and I got my fellowship in the Mission Institute and all this stuff like that. But I'll never forget one thing he said to me, which confirmed what my AGD sponsor said to me. He says, And Carl said, I was a prosthodontist. I did removable.
Sure.
And I mastered that. And the only reason I got into implants is because these idiots doing implants, the implant case would fail or the implant would break, and they would always blame it on the implant, just like a dentist blames everything on his lab man. And he goes, I'm looking at this case thinking, okay, you didn't do anything right. The denture's wrong, the bite's wrong. I mean, every single thing with this is wrong. And now you're wondering why the case failed. And so he was cross-trained. He was a removable prost and then went to fixed prost, an implant surgeon, all this stuff like this. I see the same thing going on today that's very, very weird in the implant deals. You go to any major meeting and the big sexy implant course is the all-on-4 and it's packed house. And I've stood up in those courses and said, hey, I'm just curious, how many people, raise your hand if you've never done an all-on-4, and all the hands come up. And then I say, how many of you this year did an all-on-none denture? All the hands go up. And I'm starting to see what Carl saw the first time, that, well, first of all, the all-on-4, why do they need all-on-4? It's not because they ate too much yogurt after the yoga class. I mean, it's not because, I'm out here in Arizona. These are real Kansas hillbillies. I mean, all my implant patients, that you go to the course, they say, well, you can't do it if they smoke or drink or are obese or have any of these problems. Dude, those are the only people that show up. They have a pack of Marlboro Red in their pockets. Sure. They haven't brushed their teeth. And what they need is a removable, because when you do that fixed all-on-4, they come in and you could blow out a ham sandwich underneath this thing. But my question is this, how do you get these kids to realize that you need to master an all-on-none and then work into an all-on, maybe the Australians will put one implant right in the middle of the symphysis. The Americans do it where the canine teeth are. And when I go back 30 years, in fact, one of my classmates I just talked to this morning, he didn't want me to say his name on the air because it'll embarrass him. His name is Chip Cassidy in Bakersfield, California. And the legends left that course. And you know what they did? They went back to their hometown, like Chip went to Bakersfield or whatever, and they would buy the local Denture World, some $200,000 business in a double-wide pre-manufactured mobile home deal that had a brand name forever, that come here and we'll do the reline on the spot. We have a lab tech. And they went back and they bought those little things and they started the old upgrade. Well, yeah, the denture's $299, but Ivoclar's got these really fancy, prettier teeth, and that one costs more. That's $499. And we could put 2 implants down here and it snaps on, and that's, $29.99. And you could, and all the way to the all-on-4, which they stay out of the 20s. All the all-on-4, the clear choice, it's all 20s, high 20s. So they all stay at $19,999 because they know they're out there shopping. 99. And my God, they just made bank. I mean, a lot of these guys took a $200,000 a year denture reline mobile home trailer double wide and turned it to doing $3 to $5 million a year. And they still have, half get the cheapest thing on the menu, and then maybe a quarter buy fancier Ivoclar teeth, but 10% upgrade into implants, and some of them are placing 50, 60 implants a month. So how do we get these kids to go back and look at what's really the biggest part of the market, which is all-on-nones? You need to start at all-on-none and then move up to all-on-1 if you're down under all-on-2. How do you do it?
You're the wealth of knowledge. You remember Charlie English way back in the day?
Oh, yes. And you know why I loved him the most? I'm sorry to interrupt, but you know why I loved him the most? When you do 100 crowns in a row and they all exactly seat and you don't adjust and it's all perfect, you didn't learn a damn thing. Charlie English, Charles English, who finished out in a Green Lab in Arkansas.
Right.
He would come up there. He had so much self-esteem. He wasn't that traveling implant gook who had his 5 perfect cases and went around trying to gain self-esteem around the world. He showed up with every nightmare, problem, failure, and he would go through those failures because he had so much high self-esteem. And I loved him for showing the worst skeletons in the closet, and he taught everyone so much by only showing the nightmare dental
scenarios.
abortion cases, not the pretty
100%.
stuff.
Charlie used to say there's a lot to be said about denture teeth and acrylic. A large percentage of my patients wound up being just like you described. The all-in-4 concept was not necessarily there. Some of us experimented, or I don't want to use the word experimented, but did some things for Stereos before it became Nobel with immediate placements and making, like I would take some impressions in the OR and then a bar would be made shortly thereafter. The reality is some patients don't realize that an all-in-4 concept with a fixed restoration, there's maintenance costs. It's not $99 to go ahead and get a hygiene appointment. The screws have to be replaced. Some of them are $78 a piece. It's like they get a restoration that they may not be necessarily used to. But what you make as a point is exactly true. Even going back to which I've never heard before, and I very much like it. And that'll be something, if I have your permission, I'll put in a slide and your name will be on it, is all on zero. Learning basic prosthetics. I did a year of grad pros and elective at the VA outside of Ohio State, and it was strictly removable. And I learned a great deal about that. My goal was to learn pros so I could be a better surgeon because I don't do the restorations. But having someone learn good quality pros, all on none, progressing up, and then deciding with a patient if you want to have some of these more esoteric and well thought of prosthetics now is the wealth of knowledge. Again, what we talked about before, someone that's taken a few courses, put in maybe 15 or 20 implants, and all of a sudden they're talking about doing an all-on-4 case. It just doesn't make any sense. In fact, the surgical involvement with that for a time period in a general dental office, I have great, issues with. Again, being trained in an OR, but nonetheless, you need to be very proficient in these. And one of the things I try to bring across, and then I'll stop, is a lot of these procedures, when you go past a certain point, are more surgeries that are kind of medically involved than they are dental. So I spend a lot of time with the dental brain trying to explain that if you're doing a 2-hour case and you're doing it in a dental office environment, you have to know past medical histories. You need to know how to take care of maybe some advanced bleeding issues, et cetera. So what you just said, I'm 100% on board with, and I appreciate that because I think it was very well stated.
And I want to also remind you on implants that I think the orthopedic surgeons are far better than dental implantologists because they have told every one of my patients, Phoenix is a big retirement community, and every single person that gets a new artificial knee or hip, I always say, well, how long did the surgeon say it would last? And they say, well, he says it's just like your car. The car lasts 5 years and you only drive that 4% of the week and this will last 5 years. And then dentists say, oh my God, you get this implant, you can take it to heaven. And I also want to say one thing, when you can go back and you can say that Jack Hand and Jack Krauser and Grant Selig were, know all this didactic stuff and are great implant surgeons and all this stuff, but they couldn't have been unless they first did this and they realized that in the United States, the average American buys a car every 4.6 years. They buy 13 new cars by the age of 76 with a median price of $33,560. And I'm going to tell you this right now. 90% of dentists graduate at 25, work to 65. They've never sold one $33,560 case because they don't have the belief in dentistry. Every time one of my friends buys a new car, they always drive it by the house and you got to go out there and lick the hubcaps and smell it, and of course you get in the car and they always turn on the radio, and you deny every single dental cripple the chance to sit there and buy a $33,560 full mouth rehab smile makeover where they go around their friends and show everybody their new teeth, and you always blame it on the economy, the interest rates, inflation. You blame it on everything except the fact that you're in a medical dental building with 8 other people, and one guy works Monday through Thursday, 8 to 5, but every Friday he comes in, he meets a dental anesthesiologist, they put someone down, and in fact, when I would do this, I couldn't even, I'd look at the treatment plan and say, God, they need 4 molar endos. I'm not going to sit down and do 4 molar endos. So you bring in an endodontist, so I'll pay you half, do the 4 molars, and all this stuff like that, but you don't love dentistry the same amount as you loved any one of the 13 new cars you built. And Omar Reed taught it to me first. He said, you know what these dentists do is they sit down on a full mouth rehab and they're like, okay, tooth number 1 needs to be extracted because that's periodontal disease. That's $148 and Delta will pay half. Tooth number 2 needs an MOD amount. He said, forget all that. He would just look in the mouth and he'd say, look, Grant, you know, I'm sure for less than $1,000, and your insurance probably pay most of it, we could get you a cleaning and get rid of any cavities you have and like that. But just looking at your teeth, for about $5,000, I could take out a lot of the old stuff and make it look a lot prettier. But if you wanted to have a Mercedes-Benz movie star smile, for you that'd be $25,000, and I don't care what you do, it's your teeth. But are you thinking more along the lines of $1,000? Well, that's what
100%.
50% say yes. Are you looking more of the line of maybe this $5,000 range, and about 25% would say yes? And then you say, are you talking about a $25,000 smile makeover? And I was always shocked. I mean, just like some grandma, some 74-year-old grandma just said yes. And I'm like, what the hell? And the bottom line is, and then I say to Omer, I said, but how did you know it cost 5 or 25? He goes, Howard, if you got a $5,000 budget, you work backwards from there. If you got a $25,000 budget, you work backwards. I don't need to know where each cavity and gum
100%.
disease pocket is. And at $25,000, I'm just gonna, you know, I'm just gonna do the deluxe. But he first sold the case, and that's what the Double Jacks and Grant did first.
I have to tell you, that has exactly always been my philosophy. I had a patient come in years ago from the prosthodontist to go ahead and figure out what their teeth were going to cost. And I'm like, hi, how are you, et cetera. There's some other questions like, well, I need to know what the difference is between a custom abutment and a stock abutment. So I said, excuse me, I'll be happy to discuss that. And I went back, I called the individual we did a lot of cases with. And I'm like, dude, you can't break everything down to a part or piece. This patient's in my office asking the difference in price between a custom abutment. I said, just quote them a number.
Oh
Some
my
you
gosh.
win, some you win more, some you lose. At the end of the day, you shake the can and everybody's happy. The other thing I'll admit real quick before I forget is when patients ask, well, how long do these things last for? And I go, you know, they're like hips and knees, except you don't have any maintenance with a hip or knee. These you have to floss and brush. So maybe less than a hip or knee. And they kind of laugh. And I go, I want you to be around and me to be around so I can do this a second or third time. And they laugh.
Yeah, and a friend of mine, Don Curtis, from UCSFF, he says, leave an implant revision book out in your waiting room, and then so let them know that within 5 years, you're going to have to get a revision.
First of all, the word revision instead of redo needs to be somehow put in everybody's brain from the beginning, because just like medicine, which again, that's my belief, it's another form of medicine and surgery, but it's surgery. The idea of a revision is perfectly acceptable. An idea of a redo doesn't sound good. So
okay, so now I'm gonna my job here is to get Grant in trouble and make sure he loses a friend right now. One of the big questions is, do I need $135,000 millennial laser to do
okay, you're asking the wrong person, but I will tell you without giving names. I have a lot of periodontal friends. One of them bought into a practice that has one. He's like, I don't think this thing works, but it's here. I probably paid for it somehow in what I paid for the practice. He was very discouraged about having to pay, I think, like $10,000 to go to their course. He's still open-minded and has not come to a conclusion. And he is an excellent clinician in South Florida. I've had some periodontists that I've trained and helped them out with little nuances with implants. And I ask them the same question. And some swear by it. And some people are like, well, you know, it seems to be reasonably decent. At a lecture, one of the laser meetings, I was lecturing at about medically compromised patients. And there was a very well-known, I don't remember his name, university-based periodontist trainer, teacher, showed a case that was just, I don't see how it's possible that this Lanap could have saved this implant. In fact, I've never seen this, Howard, in almost 33 years. Somebody stand up, a reasonably small group, 100 people, I won't use any profanities, but basically stood up and goes, "What the blah, 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 blah are you showing? There's no way in effing world that this would ever work." And a very conservative, well-known periodontist lecturing said, "I know it looks ridiculous, but he grew like maybe 75% bone around this tooth, around this implant." So I think the jury's out. I'm not the one to give you an official answer because I don't use that. I use a CO2 laser. So.
All right. Well, hey, I'll end on a inappropriate note. My oldest sister is a cloistered Carmelite monk, and she was put in charge of translating, and she's about 3 years older than me. And when I started my magazine, I put her on the mailing list, and she called me one time. She says, "What is a prostodontist?" And I said, "Why do you ask?" She goes, "Well, prosti is artificial, tooth's love, so prostodontist is a artificial donto tooth." And I thought, really? A prostitute is artificial love? And a prostodontist is artificial tooth? I thought that was so hilarious. But on that note, hey, I know you guys are busier than a one-armed dentist. It meant the world to me that you came on the show and talked to my homies for an hour. Thanks for all you do for dentistry. How do they contact you if they want you to come to their office?
It's really easy. My email directly is JawsRus, DDS, JAWSRUS, @yahoo.com. And you can contact Cortex directly. If any of your listeners have some questions, maybe during a battle of surgery, they're more than welcome to call my cell phone. I'm happy to allow that. You just have to call me 3 times and just click off the phone so I know that I've gotten 3 missed calls. Then I know it's very important. My cell phone number is 702-622-4781.
Damn.
And we'll also contact
Cortex for sure
on a customer's behalf. We can be reached at 866-GO-CORTEX or info.us@cortex-dental.com. We'll put you right in touch with Dr. Selig as well.
Okay, but one last thing, you have a website, Private Implant Lessons. Is that another place?
Construction. It's not the world's greatest shape right now. It needs to be updated dramatically.
What, the website?
Yeah.
But Private Implant Lessons, I mean, they're driving in a car right now. They can remember that too. Private Implant Lessons.
Yeah, we try to make things simple for us. Yes.
Okay. Well, hey, thank you, gentlemen, so much for coming on the show. It was an honor to podcast you. I hope you have a rocking hot day.
Yeah, pleasure, Howard. Thanks so much.
All right, take care.
Thank you, Howard.